This is Michael Popok, and it's so dark it must be legal AF after dark. You already heard about the Trump conviction. You know all about that. But we focus on legal AF on our most recent episode on how corporate media covered the trial, how that differed from how this network covered the trial. And particularly, we focused on Michael Cohen. Of course we did. He's a fellow podcaster and he's on our network. But how corporate media, with their angle, if you will, undermined Michael Cohen's testimony when in the reality of what was going on in the courtroom was being left to Legal AF and the MeidasTouch network to discuss. We break it all down on Legal AF, the podcast. Take a listen.
Let me reveal our processes and procedures here at Legal AF and the MeidasTouch network. Before we make a prediction or before we report on something, what are we doing behind the scenes? Well, we have a great team of researchers, a great team of reporters here, a great editorial team by Ron Filipkowski, but Michael Popok, myself, Karen Friedman-Agnifilo, and others who do the legal commentary, we roll up our sleeves and we read and we read and we read. And what are we looking at? Every day we read the trial transcripts. I don't just want to hear what the reporters are saying. I do want to hear what they're saying also, but I want to read the trial transcripts for myself. Where there is evidence introduced, I want to read all of the documents, all of the exhibits that are introduced. We read and we would show those to you. We'd show you the checks. We'd show you the court filings in the past where Donald Trump actually confessed that these were reimbursements. We showed you the emails. We showed you that government ethics disclosure form in 2018 where Donald Trump referred to the payments to Michael Cohen as reimbursements. We showed you the handwritten notes on Trump letterhead from Trump's former CFO, Alan Weisselberg, and Trump's former controller, Jeff McConney, which showed how the scheme was actually done and how they grossed up the amount to Michael Cohen. And you add the $50,000 Red Finch amount, and that's how you get the $420,000. We play the audio recordings. We show you Donald Trump's statement. So the evidence, the transcripts themselves, we read the testimony. We have our own sources in the courtroom, some you know, some who remain on background, who we're constantly in touch with. We're reading the reporters who are going on the record, people like Adam Klasfeld, Frank Runyon, Tyler McBrien, Katie Fang, Anna Bauer, and others. So we're reading what they're saying, all of them, not just one person, so we can get lots of different angles of this. We have the former number 2 at the Manhattan District Attorney's Office who worked at that office for nearly 30 years, who's appeared before Justice Merchan, who's tried countless cases there and in other courtrooms. Karen Friedman-Agnifilo, who served as the acting Manhattan District Attorney at times, give us this information. And so all of that created this tapestry. You put all of that inputs together, and then we do the show. And then we talk about it, and we try to make predictions, but we're not just out here pushing a narrative, you know. And so when the corporate media was talking about out of the 21 hours where Michael Cohen testified, where Todd Blanche asked Michael Cohen about an October 26 phone call that Michael Cohen said took place with Donald Trump, where they talked about the deal to make the hush money payments to Stormy Daniels. Then Michael Cohen was provided other text messages he was sending that same day to Donald Trump's bodyguard, Keith Schiller, at the same time, which mentioned that during that phone call, Cohen had also had discussions with Keith Schiller about this 14-year-old kid who was harassing Cohen and harassing the campaign. Todd Blanche cross-examined Cohen and said, well, isn't it true that your conversation was really about the 14-year-old and had nothing to do with Stormy Daniels? And first off, there was a ton of phone calls that Michael Cohen had with Keith Schiller and Donald Trump and a ton of other meetings regarding the Stormy Daniels deal. That wasn't the most significant phone call regardless, but even if there was some great significance about the phone call, Michael Cohen very confidently said, well, it could have been about multiple topics. I very distinctly remember having this conversation with Donald Trump there, and I believe Keith Schiller passed Donald Trump the phone and we talked about the Stormy Daniels deal. And then on the cross-examination, Todd Blanche said, but the entire phone call was 90 so seconds. You talked about that? And Cohen said, yeah, we talk about a lot of topics. And then Todd Blanche says, you're a liar. You lie. You're lying right now. And then there was an objection from the prosecution. The objection was sustained. And then Todd Blanche moved on to the next topic. And I remember that day as it was being reported on all of the corporate media saying the case just fell apart. Todd Blanche had a Perry Mason moment. This is a big deal. Cohen collapsed on the witness stand. And you now know the process, and I'm sure you knew before, the diligence and meticulousness that we bring to everything that we do. And we were looking at all of these things and we were talking to all of our sources inside the courtroom. And everybody, all of the lawyers in the courtroom who I respect and I know who have real trial experience said, Ben, that really wasn't a big moment. Sure, maybe you scored a few points, but Todd Blanche's cross-examination was so long and meandering that it really didn't land. And so we don't get it. So Michael Popok, you and I and Karen on other shows, we would say that. But I also didn't want to seem like, we're just being like, don't believe the corporate media. Like I'm just, kind of whining from the top of my mountain hill saying, everybody, they're lying to you. But I knew that they were not telling the truth. And it was such a strange thing that they were pushing this narrative that just wasn't what was happening. And then I think that's what they do with everything. Popok.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I'll just stay on that point. There's a reason you and I, having gotten those details from people inside the courtroom and even hearing about it in real time, did not believe the narrative that was being pushed intentionally or unintentionally, and likely intentionally at the moment, because there's an old line in the newspaper media world: if it bleeds, it leads. The gorier the story, the more it ends up on the front page, and the same thing still infects presentation in corporate media. And I knew, and you knew it, because having tried cases for over 30 years, having been in front of dozens of juries, having tried cases as long or longer than this one, and shorter cases as well, I knew there are good moments and bad moments, good days and bad days, white knuckle days and days where you're rolling in the roses based on your case. And the case that you think you're going to present and have to defend if you're on that side, and the case you end up doing are usually two different things. There's no perfect trial. And moments, and I've said this early on, I'll keep saying it, and I know it from my own perspective. Jury science, there's actually people who focus on the world of juries and how juries as a collective make decisions. 12 strangers lashed together into something called the jury. Now, historic jury, this will be listed in each one of their, once if they ever out themselves in their obituaries for having been involved in this. But we knew going into it, based on all this information, that juries make decisions about the case. I don't care how complicated it is and how long the case is early on in the case. We have to go through, for due process standpoint, we have to go through the trial presentation and the evidence presentment and all of that, and the cross-examination and the weighing of evidence. Yes. But juries after the opening statements, which was definitely to the prosecution's advantage, that opening statement was coherent, it was authentic, it was internally consistent, it tied together the evidence that there was going to be presented, and they delivered on all of that as a golden thread through the trial. Juries after that usually wait a little bit. They want to hear from the first witness. And the first witness was David Pecker for 2 days. Forget Michael Cohen for this moment. I don't mean him as a person. Just forget Michael Cohen as a concept. David Pecker, and you and I said it along with Karen, I thought those were the beginning nails in the coffin. That if we're right that the juries make decisions early on, and then they're just waiting for the lawyers to shut their mouths so they can start deliberating, then they made their decision 6 weeks ago after David Pecker. And then because the prosecution was able to continue to deliver on what they promised and cash those checks that they wrote in the opening, that just reinforced it. And then when the jury, so a moment in time, there's always a moment when your star witness or one of your star witnesses has a momentary stumble on cross-examination. And it's fine because juries take the long view about what believability, credibility of witnesses and that moment. And the moment that I'll leave it on this, Ben, the moment that mainstream media jumped on because they were looking for something gory that day to report on. Oh, tides. This is like the sports announcers who try to keep the audience interested in a blowout game, a game where the other team's up by 40 points. Oh, that was an amazing run by the quarterback. Really? At the end, that's the Super Bowl was won by the team that was up by 40 points. And the prosecution was up by a lot of points, in my view, by the time we got to that. And it wasn't even a stumble because Michael Cohen, remembering a conversation from 9 years ago that lasted all of 8 minutes, and then the prosecution scrambling to find that still of the video from C-SPAN showing that Donald Trump was standing next to the very bodyguard, meaning it reinforced that Michael Cohen could have had and did have a conversation about 2 topics with 2 people who happened to be next to each other and the phone was passed between them. And that is obviously from an inference standpoint. Remember, that was what the jury, there was only a few jury instructions that were read back. And one of them was, how do we make inferences from facts? And the judge told them, and within 3 hours, 4 hours of further deliberation, they were 9.5 hours in, they made their decision. And I am sure that it's inferences like that help them lead to the conviction. And lastly, as we predicted, and I've said it since, I don't know when we started following this trial, this was binary for me. It wasn't going to be, maybe counts 1, 12, 14, and 18 and the rest. No. They were either going to buy completely the evidence presentation and the burden of proof on the prosecution and find 35-0 against, or 0-34 and fine for Donald Trump. Nothing in between, because those 34 counts, as we said when the indictment first came out, were journal entries, invoices, and checks. But the fundamental underlying criminal conduct, they either believed it and found it was proven by the prosecution, or they didn't. And that's why it was 34-0.
During the closing argument, the prosecutor, Josh Steinglass, who just did an incredible job, reenacted the phone call. The phone call lasted, I think it was actually like 90 seconds. And what Josh Steinglass did in the reenactment, it showed how easy it was to do this conversation and talk about multiple topics in half that time, in 45 seconds. There was a clear theme in the closing argument by the prosecution and a focus on evidence and details. On the other hand, the defense closing argument is none of this happened. Donald Trump never had relations with Stormy. This was all about extortion. And by the way, that MAGA lawyer, Robert Costello, who basically collapsed on cross-examination as the only defense witness, let's pretend that he's credible, right? That may work on Fox and that may work on propaganda media or even corporate media regurgitating MAGA talking points. But one of the things that's so precious about our judicial system and our court of law, and why you and I have such reverence for it, and why we work so hard to protect it, is because truth really matters in a court of law. And you can take 12 people, and it's hard to make 12 people be unanimous on anything. But when you provide them with the truth, they will come to that conclusion. And we saw that here. I want to show this. You mentioned Michael Cohen. Cohen had the ability to speak out, though, after the criminal trial concluded, after the jury verdict. And, I asked Cohen a question that the corporate media was not asking him, because I think they were probably too embarrassed to ask him. And I said, Cohen, what did you make of the coverage after you testified 21 hours and you did a great job, but the corporate media was saying that you blew it and that you collapsed on the stand because of that one question? I said, what did you make of that? I thought it was an important question that he had not been asked. I want to show you that moment. Let's play it. I would be remiss, Cohen, if I didn't ask you about this moment in the 21 hours of testimony where Todd Blanche yelled at you and he was like, you lie, you lie. And there was a phone call in October that could have been about multiple topics. And then the media ran with that and was like, oh my God, there was a Perry Mason moment. Meanwhile, there was an objection. The objection was sustained. And everybody who I knew in the courtroom was saying that that was not a significant moment, like at all. It didn't even make like a dent. But when you turned on CNN or MSNBC, whether it was Ellie Honig or Ari Melber on MS, they were pushing this narrative.
Let me just jump to those idiots for a quick second before you finish your question. There's something very wrong with Ellie Honig, to be honest with you. There's something really fundamentally fucked up with this guy. I used to actually say, oh yeah, he's a friend of mine, to the extent that, we would speak to each other. He's on my podcast like 7-8 times. He's trying to be just like Ari Melber. They're trying to be contrarians. They're trying to show, we don't really sort of play this one side. Well, there's only one side to truth. There's only one side to being right. All right. It's not like Donald when he said, when he was talking about the Nazis in Charlottesville marching, well, there's good people on both sides. No, there's not. All right. It's the same thing. Melber's an idiot. So is Ellie Honig. By the way, how do you know that Ellie Honig is an idiot? How do you know that he's wrong? Because Donald Trump was held accountable and guilty on 34 counts. Despite all of Honig said, I wouldn't be shocked if it's an acquittal. He goes, I never liked this case at all. They never should have brought it. It's a weak case. And you really aren't going to be able to put the misdemeanor into the federal crime. I've never heard of anything like that. That's because he was a shit lawyer all along. All right.
And look, I think Michael Cohen has every right, especially in light of the verdict, to comment where he was being attacked by the corporate media over and over again.
Welcome back. It is an amazing week for justice, and it's important that you be with us. We appreciate you. We're glad you're here. That was Legal AF. We do that podcast, and now you know why we named it Legal AF, every Wednesday and Saturday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. And then on hot takes like this one, all the contributors and founders of Legal AF bring it to you straight right here, one place only. If you know all about Legal AF, we really appreciate you being part of our audience. We literally could not do it without you, and we're building this network with our bare hands and yours. If you know about us, take that clip, send it off, be our ad hoc marketing department. We need it. Send it to friends and family, people in your life, and ask them to join our Legal AF audience. If you have no idea what I'm talking about, that was Legal AF, and I'm Michael Popok, and I invite you to join our next episode. So until my next hot take, until my next Legal AF, this is Michael Popok reporting. Heary, Legal AF Law Breakdown is now in session. Go beyond the headlines and get a deep dive into the important legal concepts you need to know and we discuss every day on Legal AF. Exclusive content you won't find anywhere else, all for the price of a couple of cups of coffee. Join us at patreon.com/legalaf. That's patreon.com/legalaf.